Welcome back to Media7, where I'm talking to Keith Hunter, Peter Williams and Anna Sandifer about the long, long shadow of the Crewe murders. Keith, we saw some of the journalists and some of the media that has been generated by this case earlier on. The media were crucial in what happened, weren't they, over that decade?
As they always are. It's the function of the media to be crucial. If we weren't around the place, the lawyers would get away with anything, wouldn't they? I mean, it sounds like a joke, but people are people. Lawyers are no more perfect or non-circumspect than anybody else. So, yeah, they need looking after and looking over, and so do the judges, so does the judiciary. Everyone does. It's our job.
That wasn't necessarily the view at the time. Terry Bell, who was deputy editor of the Auckland Star, had to resign to write his book. After being told it is not the role of the newspapers to attempt to try the courts. It was a different country back then, wasn't it?
It is our role to try the courts. That's the function of the jury. That's the function of journalism, the journalists, the press, the media. That's why we're here. Well, otherwise, what do? We could just put up nice little stories about, I don't know, cupcakes and stuff. But we're here to comment on what's going on. It doesn't matter, as Peter mentioned, it doesn't matter who's making it happen. That's our function. And you don't pick favourites. You attack what needs to be attacked.
Do you agree with that, Peter? Did the Fourth Estate do its job?
Oh, well, Pat Booth, of course, did a tremendous job.
Yes.
He should not be underestimated, and I pay homage to him now.
And so do I. Yeah.
It is said that the hippie stopped the Vietnam War. And similarly here, there were all sorts of characters connected with the Thomas Committee. But they managed to arouse public sympathy. I'll give you one example. There was a meeting as to whether or not the town hall should be hired to have a public meeting, which, so most of them said, well, who's going to pay? Who's going to pay the cost? No one might turn up. And there's a chap there from the Salvation Army, he said, I will pay. He said, you've got to go ahead. We will fill the hall. So we had the meeting and we did fill the hall. The hall was absolutely full and there were people queued up down Queen Street. Later, it was a very successful meeting. A day or two later, we had a drink at a nearby hotel and he was there. And I said to him, I suppose you would like a lemonade or something. Oh, no, he said, I'll have a double whiskey. I said, I didn't think the Salvation Army, I said, a drink, alcohol. Oh, he said, I'm not in the Salvation Army. He said, I just bought this uniform at the second-hand shop.
But it has to be said...
We had some characters here.
It has to be said that not every editor, Peter, was your friend. The New Zealand Herald was quite anti-Thomas, wasn't it?
Well, no doubt about that. The New Zealand Herald used to be extremely conservative. It was, the social page and Mrs Horton and all that sort of stuff. I like to think that they are becoming a little bit towards the centre now. And I like to think that the news media is a bit more fair and equitable. But if you hear talkback radio, you might not agree with that proposition.
Well, Thomas wasn't the last call celeb, and Anna, there's been a few. What's the impact on your job as a neutral witness when a case becomes the subject of such scrutiny and everyone's talking about it? What do you do?
The media does dictate public feeling, or maybe the media will say that they're representing public feeling. If you're involved in a case where there's a lot of negative media attention, it can actually be really hard work. I spent 9 months working on the David Bainbridge trial, and by the time I got to the end of that, literally the day that the verdicts were heard, I came out of court to this massive media scrum, and I never mentioned the case that I'd worked on it for about a year because the negative relationship to that, and that people thought that my comments had been bought, my evidence had been bought, which of course is completely not the case. And also during the trial, I would be in court all day, I'd watch the news in the evening, and there would be something completely unrelated, allegedly to do with the day of that trial, and they'd not talked about the important things, and they'd moved on to something that's probably less important and not necessarily the way they wanted it to be going. But
do you think it's a good thing that trials are televised now?
It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Again, going back to the David Bainbridge trial, they were allowed to film for the first 15 minutes of the day, film him for the first 15 minutes of the day, and then nothing after that. So when somebody was giving evidence in the afternoon and they wanted a response to that, they would have to cut a reaction from earlier in the day and put it afterwards. And I found that to be not necessarily an accurate record of what happened. So I just got to the point where I just didn't watch any of it and didn't read any of it. And I tend not to take any notice of any media when I'm involved in a case now.
And yet, in the end, Keith, it wasn't a journalist who made the Royal Commission happen, and it wasn't anyone in the police or the judicial system. It was Robert Muldoon.
It was indeed. It's interesting the way that that commission was set up. Muldoon selected the 3 commissioners when the Chief Justice of the time was out of the country. And he deliberately...
Minister of Police was out of the country too.
They were all out of the country.
But never got it through.
And so the people...
Again, those were different times. You could not have done that.
None of those 3 was involved with the New Zealand justice system. And so we got a sort of report that we would not have got otherwise, in my view.
It strikes me that we haven't referred to your conclusion. In your view, Len Demler was the killer.
The police always knew. Everyone always knew that. The police only changed for a very apparent reason, and it's a light one, nothing to do with guilt or innocence. Yeah, Demler did it. Everyone's always known Demler did it. That's not news.
You also made a documentary and wrote a book on the Scott Watson case.
I did, yeah.
How would you compare the two?
Oh, the Thomas case isn't a patch on the evils of the Watson case. This is a trifle compared with what was done and is still being done to Scott Watson. The Watson case is the apex. This is nowhere near it.
And yet that's faded into the background. Why did it not become a cause célèbre like the Thomas one? Why is there no free Scott Watson?
Because the police managed to defame Watson to such a degree that no one cared about him. He became a man who didn't matter. And that's why he's in prison. He's in prison. He was convicted because he doesn't matter, because of an extraordinary campaign of defamation conducted by the police. That's why he's in prison. He's a bad guy. He deserves to be in there. They didn't do that. They tried to do that with Thomas to a degree, but they failed.
Peter, do you think we see many of these miscarriages of justice?
New Zealand has more than its quota. There's no doubt about that. We have far more miscarriages of justice on a population basis. It's a very worrying feature. The police really in this country, they issue propaganda. They've got a very large PR, and there's an urge to put the blinkers on, to concentrate on the person who's been charged, to disregard anything that may establish his innocence or help him, go for the jugular, and then get the conviction. And that's a very, very poor outlook.
So it sounds like there's plenty of material there for you, Keith. What's next for you?
After 10 years,
like me, finally
there's so much stuff. Really,
no,
the next one I'm going to go back to elements of the end of the Watson affair, because he is being treated unbelievably badly by the system, and there's a lot more in that case. I'm not so much it's not so much about Watson. It's about the performance of the system. And this time, rather than ask questions, as I did in my previous book, I'm going to make statements, and they'll be rather more robust than just the questions in my book.
Well, we look forward to the next instalment. Thank you all very much.
Pleasure.
And that's our show. Thanks to Keith Hunter, Peter Williams and Anna Sandiford. And thanks to you for watching. We'll be back with Media7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.